Hello, good evening. This is Q News, and we begin tonight's bulletin with the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Lebanon's caretaker information minister, Ziad Makari, has announced that Lebanon's cabinet approved a damage assessment plan, debris removal, and an advance of 4,000 billion Lebanese lira. Makari urged residents to follow the army's instructions for a safe return and confirmed that military aid will arrive next week. The ceasefire monitoring committee is expected to meet on Monday to activate the deployment plan. Makari also emphasized the army's presence on the northern and eastern borders. Earlier, the Lebanese Council of Ministers has convened at the Benoit Barakat barracks in Tyre. The Council of Ministers announced decisions to enhance army deployment, draft a law to restore demolished buildings, survey agricultural damage, and coordinate rubble removal efforts. Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati has met with General Guillaume Ponchin, head of the French military delegation to the ceasefire monitoring committee. During the meeting, Prime Minister Mikati reiterated Lebanon's key priorities, including upholding the ceasefire, addressing Israeli violations, ensuring the withdrawal of Israeli occupation forces from Lebanese territories, and reinforcing the deployment of the Lebanese army in the south. And for analysis now on the situation, we cross over to Mona, who is in our newsroom. Mona.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark. And for further analysis on the situation in Lebanon, we're joined from Beirut by journalists at An-Nahar newspaper, Iskandar Khashashu. Welcome to Qnews. And in the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 being fully implemented on Lebanon's borders.
Good evening. I believe that the resolution 1701 is still in the process of realization. Till this moment, it has not been implemented on the ground, or actually fully implemented on the ground. But it's in the process. It's in the process of implementation. And now this resolution is a need for Lebanon and for Israel as well. So Lebanon can make use of the 1701 as well as Israel can make use of it. Now the fights are happening on other borders, and what's happening in Syria is highly impacting Lebanon. Lebanon has got a real interest in spreading the Lebanese army on all its borders, including the borders with Israel and borders with Syria. Till this moment, the negotiations are going fine. And yes, Israel is violating the ceasefire, but I believe that the violations will be there even for the 50 days. But in the end, there will be stabilization of borders and truce on this border, because the two countries, Israel and Lebanon, will be more focused on Syria.
Now, from your point of view, what are the challenges hindering the enforcement of the Resolution 1701 in southern Lebanon?
There is a huge number of changes happening, including the war that took place and its devastating impact on Lebanon and on Israel. There is a lot of devastation, destruction in Lebanon, and the same happened to the north of Israel. There has been destruction in northern parts of Israel, and displacement as well. Of course, much less than Lebanon, but it was very apparent This is the first part, and it is clear that both countries have got an interest to stop the war, and this happened starting with the ceasefire that was reached. Secondly, the war in Syria and the changes that are happening on the borders with Syria, we can say there is ambiguity about what kind of regime is still there in Syria and who will be controlling the borders and what will happen to Syria, and what about the Syrian borders with Golan Heights. This is also another issue. What about the Syrian borders with Lebanon, which are really vast borders, and we don't know what will happen for it and how things will be evolving around that issue. But what's certain so far, the Iranian corridor and the Lebanese-Iranian corridor has been cut from Syria, and as no supply of weapons to Hezbollah from Syria anymore. Because of this, Hezbollah would be weaker and weaker, and this will catalyze and help the implementation of 1701 and spreading the Lebanese army in the south and getting more calm in these areas.
Now, from your point of view, will the Lebanese parliament succeed with regard, of course, of the ongoing challenges that are occurring? Will the parliament succeed in electing a president by January? And what are the primary obstacles to electing a president in Lebanon in the meanwhile?
Till this moment, there are no indicators. Till this moment, there are no indicators, despite all what has been said and despite all the momentum and all the movement regionally and internationally. There is no president elected, and there might not be a president elected. And Lebanon is highly connected to all Lebanon is highly connected to all its neighbors, and things, I think, will freeze in Lebanon, and we will wait till to see what happens in Syria. Talk about January 9 session is just talk. Even the internal dynamics did not come to any agreement or to any result. Everything is just in place. Nothing is happening in Lebanon. And the allies of the Syrian regime or the allies of Hezbollah, they are still stationed where they are, and there is the opposition also stationed in place. So far there hasn't been any agreement reached or no common ground between anybody and anybody. So maybe we can say that all elements would say there will be no election on January 9th. Even the American side and Mossad, Poulos said, if you have waited for 2 years, wait for another 2 or 3 months. So even the Americans are not eager to elect a president on the 9th of January. So Lebanon will be in the refrigerator of wait till something settles in the region and some agreements happen in the region and some Arab and foreign elements get to something.
Now, returning back to the Lebanese territories, and is the current ceasefire agreement likely to be extended after 60 days? And what role are the international mediators playing in ensuring the ceasefire upheld?
It is certain that there will be an extension of the ceasefire. I personally believe that this ceasefire will be permanent. There will be no more war on the southern front of Lebanon. I can reiterate what I said before, but what is happening in Syria has cut supplies to Hezbollah from Syria. Hezbollah is much weakened military-wise, and today the supply chain to Hezbollah is cut. Therefore, Hezbollah is now having just an interest to continue towards coolness and towards freezing the situation and to de-escalate what is happening in Syria and what is happening in Gaza Strip, and the continuity of resistance even in Gaza, and the urgent need for getting to peace is still there. That's why Israel will not open another front in the north. This ceasefire will be permanent, and this ceasefire is a joint interest for Lebanon and Israel now. especially as there is some international sponsorship of this ceasefire, and continuing with that ceasefire, war will not return to Lebanon, at least from the Israeli side. There will be no war between Lebanon and Israel.
Right, that was Iskandar Khashashu, journalist at An-Nahar newspaper. Thank you so much for your insights here. And back to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mona. Good evening to you. Now, Syria and the Syrian presidency has denied rumours that some foreign media outlets are spreading false rumours about President Bashar al-Assad leaving Damascus or making brief visits to other countries. The Syrian presidency highlighted their obvious intentions and confirmed that this pattern of misinformation has been used for years to manipulate the state and Syrian society during the war. The presidency asserts that President al-Assad continues his national and constitutional duties from Damascus, emphasizing that all news and statements about him are issued through official platforms and Syrian national media. The Syrian armed forces have reported on an organized media campaign targeting national security and spreading chaos to serve hostile agendas. Syrian army has accused terrorist-linked platforms of spreading false news across Syria. It is conducting intensive operations in Hama, in Homs, and northern Dara, inflicting significant losses on terrorists, forces are reinforcing positions in rural Damascus and the south to prevent further incidents. The Syrian General Command has confirmed that Syrian forces in Dara and Suwaida executed a redeployment and established a strong and cohesive security perimeter after armed groups attacked military checkpoints in an attempt to distract the Syrian army, which is regaining control over the area. That came in a statement where it emphasized that the Syrian military is committed to protecting national security and citizens, vowing to confront terrorism with determination. Additionally, a military source denied reports of armed men entering the Qayatain area in the southeast of Homs, confirming full readiness. Meanwhile, Egypt has denied the claims made by the Wall Street Journal that Egyptian officials urged the Syrian president to leave the country and form a government in exile. Egypt affirms that this information is entirely false and baseless. Also, Egypt calls on all media outlets to verify the accuracy of the information they publish. Ministry of Foreign Affairs has urged Egyptian citizens currently in Syria to exercise the utmost caution and avoid areas of tension, adhere to the instructions of the relevant Syrian authorities, and refrain from travelling to Syria at this time, and maintain continuous contact with the Egyptian embassy in Damascus. The ministry has formed a crisis cell to monitor developments regarding the situation of Egyptian nationals in Syria around the clock. The ministry also calls on Egyptians residing or present in Syria to quickly register their details so that the Egyptian embassy in Damascus can review and monitor their conditions, ensure their well-being, and take any necessary action. The Iraqi Foreign Minister Fuad Hussein and the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and the Syrian Foreign Minister Bassam al-Sabagh have stated that the advance of armed forces in Syria poses a serious danger to Iran, Iraq and Syria. The three countries described the armed faction as terrorists, stressing that there was a need for collective action to confront it. The ministers also condemned the ongoing Israeli attacks on Syria as well as on Gaza and Lebanon. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, has said that Moscow would oppose Syria's armed factions in every possible way. Lavrov told journalists at a forum in Qatar that the armed factions' offensive had been planned long in advance and represented an attempt to change dynamics on the ground in Syria. He added that Russia will oppose this in every possible way and will support the legitimate Syrian authorities. According to the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, at least 370,000 people, mostly women and children, have now been displaced in Syria due to the latest escalation in fighting. Additionally, the UN World Food Programme expects 1.5 million people to be displaced. The White House spokesperson, Karine Jean-Pierre, has said that the US is closely monitoring developments in Syria. Jean-Pierre said that the US is monitoring and taking the situation seriously. She added the US is continuing to stay in contact with countries in the region.
And the NSC put out a statement just last weekend, the Assad regime's ongoing refusal to engage.
Now we get the latest developments in Gaza. "26 Palestinians have been killed and more than 60 others injured in Israeli shelling of homes in al-Nusayrat refugee camp in the central Gaza Strip. The official Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that Israeli warplanes targeted a residential building. Some of the victims were later identified and transported to the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah, located in the central Gaza Strip. Medical sources reported that the death toll in Gaza since early Friday morning has risen to 63, including 35 victims from northern Gaza. Eight citizens have been killed in the Israeli occupation's bombing of the Al-Karama area, located northwest of Gaza City. They added that an occupation drone targeted a group of civilians in Jabalia al-Balad, north of the Gaza Strip, killing 2 and injuring others. 3 civilians were killed in the occupation's bombing of the Al-Mashrua area, east of Rafah, south of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli occupation army has directly targeted an ambulance in front of the Kamal Adwan hospital in Beit Lahia, north of the Gaza Strip. Early yesterday, the occupation army withdrew from Kamal Adwan hospital after an hours-long raid, during which it detained staff and patients, forcing those present to leave. The army also compelled an Indonesian medical team, the only one performing surgeries inside the hospital, to evacuate. Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, has said that Qatar is engaged with the Trump administration on Gaza after sensing fresh momentum for ceasefire talks following the US election. That statement came during a conference in Doha, where he said that Qatar has received significant encouragement from the incoming administration to achieve a deal, even before the president takes office. Also, Qatar's Prime Minister described what is happening in Gaza as genocide. He warned of severe regional instability if the situation continues, stressing that diplomatic efforts can succeed with sufficient willpower.
And what's happening on the ground, and it comes to any differences between
the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, Francesca Albanese, has stated that it is time to take the necessary measures and do everything possible to stop the ongoing Israeli brutality in the Gaza Strip. Albanese stressed that Israel is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. She added that what is happening in Gaza cannot be described as just a war, it is total destruction. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has said that the catastrophe in Gaza represents a complete collapse of humanity. The UN Secretary-General stressed that the world cannot continue to turn a blind eye to what is happening in the Gaza Strip. He added that this nightmare must stop. The Palestinian Health Ministry has said that the Israeli occupation forces shot dead a Palestinian at the Kalandia checkpoint. The Palestinian Red Crescent announced in a statement that its crews had received the body of a Palestinian in his 20s at the Kalandia checkpoint and were transferring to hospital. Violence has surged in the West Bank since the start of the war in Gaza, with almost daily sweeps by Israeli occupation forces involving thousands of arrests and regular gun battles. UNESCO's 19th session of the Intergovernmental Committee has adopted the decision to include the Nablus soap, making tradition in Palestine, on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. The committee also urged all countries and international actors to protect the Palestinian people and their heritage and culture from Israel's ongoing genocide attempts and illegal occupation, while working to uphold the Palestinian people's inalienable cultural rights. The decision by UNRWA to suspend aid deliveries into Gaza has further exacerbated the already dire humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. The Commissioner General, Felipe Lazzarini, called on Israel to maintain law and order. The few bakeries in the southern Gaza Strip that had been operating closed their doors this week due to a lack of flour, worsening the hunger and creating a famine-like situation for mass Palestinians. The World Health Organization's regional representative has stated that the agency has no indication that a warning was issued prior to Israel's bombing of Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza. Rick Pieperkorn from the WHO expressed concern over the attack at the hospital, noting that it occurred just a week after Israeli authorities had facilitated the entry of an Indonesian emergency medical team.
Very close to all minds. Then an IDF tank that's based on information outside the hospital.
And that's almost all we have time for, but here's a recap of the headlines. Lebanon approves damage assessment and debris removal and a 4,000 billion lira advance. The Syrian presidency denies rumors of al-Assad leaving Damascus spread by foreign media. And Israeli shelling kills 26 Palestinians, injures over 60 in Al Nusayrat camp. And that's all for now here on Q News, but don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at QNews EGY to stay informed. Thanks for watching. Good night.